I always kind of giggle on the graphic there, Adam. I always have to figure out if my hair actually looks like that or not. But for listeners, welcome to episode season 2, episode 7. Today we're talking about the growing cargo theft problem. We have a great guest, Chris Montez from U.S. Marine Insurance, who we were chatting with him last week, and I, in the 20 minutes that we were prepping for the meeting, I probably learned, books and pages and pages of knowledge around cargo theft, more things that I ever knew about. But it's a serious issue. We are all in the transportation, commercial transportation space, either taking cargo from ports to warehouses to distribution centers to homes. It has an impact everywhere. And I think the piece that I think that we all talk about the economy, right? It certainly has a ripple effect to the economy. And so I do want to introduce my co-host Adam Lang, who not only uh, is a great valued member of the Netradyne team, but he has a lot of experience in brokering freight. And then also Chris, who comes to us with a huge amount of experience in the space. So I want to kind of pass it over to everyone. I know that we're all kind of postpartum of the weekend sports and all that, and but let's get into this. And I think that what I'm really interested now is kind of let's start from the basics, right? Let's navigate the current landscape. Like what's happening right now, Chris. Like what types of things are are evolving in the industry that you're seeing.
Absolutely, Adam, and thanks again for having me on the podcast. It's a joy to be here with you guys today. And speaking of the caricatures, if you have your artists work up a mock of me, send them over my way, and I'll get a T-shirt made or something like that.
It
No,
took about 9 different iterations because he got everything right, and then our producer said you forgot his glasses, so we had to kind of put the glasses in, and so I felt like a little bit of a prima donna on the cartoon, but we get there. So it, I'm sure we can mock something up for you very quickly as a post guest review.
I love it. I'm in. I'm in. No, but it's a great question. And honestly, everybody's talking about cargo theft these days. It's really turned into a problem of epidemic proportions. When I started the industry 10 years ago, you would hear about a trailer going missing over the weekend or a pilferage every now and then. And now it's something that you hear about literally every hour of every day. And people have put a lot of figures to what this problem represents. I think it's easy to say it's definitely a $1 billion problem for this industry annually. A lot of people are being taken advantage of. And in terms of the current landscape, I'll tell you that these criminals are more sophisticated than they've ever been. Um, Usually these days, there's some element of cyber to their techniques, whether that be, perpetrating a double brokerage scheme where they pretend that they're a legitimate motor
We're going to put
carrier.
a pin in that
Yeah.
one because you're going to have to teach the audience of what that is because that
Yeah,
was
we'll
something
have to go
one
over
of the
that,
elements
Chris.
that I learned about. So let's not forget
Absolutely.
that one.
Yeah. And the other one is, obviously like the on-site trailer thefts, and there's still a element of cyber to that too, because we've seen that these criminals oftentimes know what's inside of the trailer before they strike. So they're very targeted at what they're going after, specific to the commodity and the load value. So it's really out of control, and we need a lot more resources and innovation to address this problem.
So it's interesting. Paramount has the second season of Landman on. And, if you haven't seen it, it's a very good episode. But I think one of the things I learned in the first season was I think Billy Bob Thornton says, "Oh yeah, trucks go missing, trailers go missing all the time, and then they just come back." Like it unfortunately feels like some of this has just become mainstream, and I don't think that's the right approach for people to take. Where we glorify it, as oh yeah, my trailer's gone. Well, but it's a big deal. Tell me what a double brokerage is.
Double brokerage is relatively simple in like how it works, right? Traditionally, right, a load is brokered to a trucking company, and one way they can do it is a trucking company just brokers that load to another trucking company.
Mhm.
That you may consider the more innocent double brokerage, right? The trucking company might not have the assets to fulfill that shipment, so they broker it to a friend down the road. They take a little bit of the rate off the top, and then everybody is happy, so to speak. But the double brokerage schemes regards to these thefts is that oftentimes the criminals are the ones posing as a legitimate trucking company. So they pose as that trucking company to a freight broker. They somehow surpass their vetting systems, and now a criminal is in charge of that shipment. Oftentimes, they'll broker that to an innocent motor carrier, and then they'll tell that motor carrier, "Oh no, that load says it's supposed to go to Pennsylvania, but actually we need for it to go to California." And so they will essentially reroute these shipments to destinations they're not supposed to go, only to find that those shipments disappear, and you're at a complete loss of a shipment that could be 100, 200, or in some cases millions of dollars in value.
And Chris, I just put this up on the screen. You mentioned California, so we have to put it out there that 32 to 38% of all U.S. cargo thefts happen in California, mostly in Long Beach and Los Angeles. I mean, this is a big problem, and even if we're recovering it, it's got to be a tremendous drain on the efforts of our law enforcement folks, our trucking companies, our partners. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, it's an enormous drain on resources, and it's a real draw on law enforcement too. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, guys. I think that there's a lot of problems that these criminals are taking advantage of. One of them is the jurisdictional issues that exist in law enforcement. If a load's stolen from Chicago today, as soon as it gets on the interstate, now it's not municipal police, it's state police. Once it crosses a state line, it's FBI. So these police departments that have information have to quickly hand over control of these investigations higher up the chain. And the FBI is just completely inundated, right? And transportation revolves around a, interstate commerce basis. So almost all of this goes to the FBI, and their threshold for investigating these crimes is $1 million, right? In order for the FBI to send resources out, deploy resources to capture one of these shipments, it has to be $1 million or greater. So oftentimes trucking companies are left just filing a report and the load vanishes. So I think it's a big strain on law enforcement resources. But, second of all, it really strains business relationships. These trucking companies and freight brokers have really tight relationships with their shippers. And so when one of these loads goes missing, oftentimes these shippers rely on the trucking companies and freight brokers to make them whole. And I do think there's kind of something a little unfair about that, because I really think that shippers have a much greater role to play in solving this issue. But nonetheless, you can't forget, they're a victim of a crime. And ultimately, it's consumers like you and I that end up paying the price for this.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was interesting. Last week I was in a summit, an insurance summit, and I was talking to one of the brokers or the agents, and he was telling me about, as an example, a trucking company that operates in certain neighborhoods versus others, and the amount to insure that vehicle. It was a magnitude of like 10x. Like he said, if this vehicle operated in neighborhoods of San Diego, it'd probably be $2,500. I'm going to make up a number here, but if it's operating in the Bronx or certain, neighborhoods of Chicago or so on, Los Angeles, it might be $25,000 to, as a magnitude. So, I think that not only is it hit at the beginning part of even getting into that transaction, but if you get caught, into an event, the end part is even, has a bigger impact to where now you're getting burnt at both ends of that candle.
Well, also, pair it up with inflation, right? The cost of a load of chicken, the cost of a load of beef. We saw what happened with eggs last year, right? We're talking about the cost of goods going up 30, 40%. So that's unheard of by itself. But then you talk about an entire shipment that's being pulled out of the supply chain that's supposed to go to a grocery store. And now, somebody pays an insurance premium to an insurance company who has to pay for that. who has to pay for the manufacturer to recreate those goods to fill that gap that was made. And it gets even more complicated when you throw in, something like imported goods and tariffs, right? Now you really see that domino effect of costs that can happen when a theft happens, but there's so many other stakeholders in the event.
So one of my childhood, music favorites, right? So I'm sure that we could probably have a whole podcast on David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar Van Halen, which one was better, which one was worse. But certainly, I saw an interesting comparison of Sammy Hagar and Bill Clinton are the same age, and if you look at both of them, I'm still a big Sammy Hagar fan. But him and our friend Guy Fiero made the news recently, and I think that one certainly created a lot of exposure around that event. Have you had a chance to kind of break down what happened there and kind of like showcase as a case study, as a lessons learned or best practices around that? Maybe if you have some insight into like what happened, that'd be great, and then we can talk about it more.
Absolutely. And I think that this is a perfect case study on a double brokerage scheme. So as you mentioned, this is Guy Fieri and Sammy Hagar's brand of tequila, Santo. And this was like a release that they were really looking forward to. It was their Añejo tequila, which, by the way, took 3 years for them to produce. It was single barrel aged, and they had timed this up 3 years ago to be ready for release in 2025 for the holidays. So it was definitely a big deal for their brand. It was 2 shipments that were, I believe, brokered to what ended up being a fraudulent motor carrier. And what I mean by that is a criminal who posed as a legitimate carrier and then double brokered the shipments to another carrier. So I believe the shipments consisted of 24,000 bottles of the Añejo tequila, and they were supposed to go from Laredo, Texas to Pennsylvania, where the company's warehouse was. Of course, these criminals ended up intercepting it, and they rerouted it to California, I believe to Los Angeles. So between these 2 trailers, it was over $1 million in value that these criminals got away with, 24,000 bottles of tequila. And I think one of the even crazier parts is that it was the company's entire inventory of that Añejo brand. So, I mean, if you think about it, actually, one other thing I want to point out that was interesting about it, and I think that everyone should be aware of, is that the criminals were able to spoof the GPS locations of the trucks. So here's what I mean by that. Oftentimes a broker will give a shipment to a carrier and then say, hey, you need to accept tracking. And that allows the broker to see exactly where those goods are in transit. And I know that, we can have a broader conversation about how important it is to track your tractors and trailers, how important it is to create geofences for those assets so that someone knows it's on the route that it's supposed to be taking. But anyhow, these criminals were able to fake their location to make it seem like 2 trucks and trailers were in transit from Laredo, Texas to Pennsylvania, when in reality, they were going the complete opposite direction to California. So this is a really common and deceptive tactic we see where the broker who had brokered these shipments didn't know the better at all. They thought that they were en route, on their way, supposed to be on time. And they had no idea that they were actually being sent to the opposite coast, and the entire inventory of the brand was soon to disappear. So it was a pretty crazy event. I think that it created some headlines that our whole industry needed that drew attention to this matter. Because everybody knows Guy Fieri, everyone's seen Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives, everyone's listened to a Van Halen song. And now all of a sudden, these idols, these people that are big in pop culture have been affected by a problem that's typically, affecting a mom and pop trucking company or a freight brokerage operation that for whatever reason tends to grab not as many headlines.
Chris, sorry, Adam.
No, go ahead.
That is a very interesting thing that you just said, because the theft itself, even though part of it was recovered, brought more attention to it just by virtue of who it happened to. And I am not saying it all. I wish Guy Fieri and Sammy Hagar all the best. I wish their tequila company all the best. I enjoy an añejo here and there. But the magnification, the spotlight that this puts on it, so the average person hears more about it, that is absolutely excellent in terms of just magnifying the issue. And again, how it kind of whittles down into the insurance industry. And now we've got insurance companies working with these trucking companies to bind cargo insurance and look at their companies and look at their levels of risk, how this goes. So, I mean, can you take us through that a little bit, and what happens to the average trucking company that might have all these things in place to protect themselves?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you that the trucking company and freight brokerage operation that pays close attention to their coverage at renewal time usually ends up having coverage for this kind of situation if they're with the right insurance company. But I would say that is 10% of the time or less. Most trucking companies and freight brokerage operations tend to turn these types of claims into their insurance companies to have them denied on a litany of exclusions, whether that be a theft exclusion or a broker operations exclusion. They've actually drafted wordings into these policy forms so something like a double brokerage is not covered because that theft was not perpetrated by the individual that the broker gave the load to, or because it was a criminal act, now the trucking company cannot have coverage, or a dishonest act. So a lot of people have been left holding the bag, and the people that have taken the time at renewal to make sure that, hey, we've heard about this theft issue in the industry, we want to make sure we have the right coverage. When they're having conversations like that with their insurance brokers, those solutions have to be made in advance, because you can't go buy insurance retroactively, right? You have to purchase it up front.
Powerful, because I think, if you would ask the average person in the industry what they thought about cargo theft, they would go back to like a movie like The Goodfellas, going and hijacking a tractor trailer and, taking it, or waiting till the driver went into the diner and coming out and his tractor and trailer are gone, which is like kind of the traditional, theft. But I think there's certainly this emerging education for motor carriers to not only, frame out that situation, but now, like any crack in the wall, water finds the crack in the wall, right? So, if you can find a better, cleaner way to not be in a violent act and, secure the cargo in a cleaner way, obviously it's going to gravitate towards that. So I find this is very valuable for any motor carrier who's listening to say, one, from a management or an executive standpoint, you really need to think about the policies that you're building out. And then two, I think there's a whole technology overlay that happens, in the traditional model where you have additional cameras, you have panic buttons, you have live streaming, you have audio, you have the ability to sort of capture that first type of theft. But now in the second part, there certainly should be a stand-up overlay of technology that starts to look at, audit trails of, brokering and cyber, cyber attacks. So, it certainly is not, my personal recommendation is not to turn a blind eye and say, it will never happen to me, right? It's the same thing when someone says, well, I'll never get into a crash. Well, okay.
And what happens right after that? And Adam, you said something for anyone out there that has questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. We'll answer them as best we can, and we'll get to them. But please, if you have questions, sorry for the interruption, Adam. Keep trucking.
No, Chris. So, like, walk me through. So now I have a motor carrier. You know, they're certainly have plenty of pressures that are put on their operation. You know, to fuel drivers. You know, getting good loads. You know, right now capacity is a little tight, and so like by chance you get a really attractive piece of freight. You know, like what are some of the steps that you might recommend for a motor carrier, or and I would actually say any commercial fleet in any part of this logistics lane to start to consider, or in addition to the sort of traditional policies that they might engage with.
Well, I think to expand on the point you just made, Adam, that a security first culture also means a technology enabled culture. You talk about getting into an accident. I mean, when I go to Chicago O'Hare Airport, it's rare that I get into an Uber that doesn't have a dash cam inside of it. So I think that if an Uber, if a Toyota Prius has a dash cam inside of it, then I think a 80,000-pound truck should have a dash cam inside of it too. So it's really to a trucking company's benefit to have this kind of technology in their trucks, and I really think it's becoming the standard. Talking about what can be done at the operational level, standard operating procedures. I mean, it is crucial these days to have standard operating procedures where the proper training is in place for all employees to spot the red flags of a security issue. And by the way, a lot of these trucking companies become almost secondary victims, right? Because that double brokerage theft that occurs, sorry to keep circling back to it, but important to make on the trucking side is that usually there's an innocent trucker who doesn't get paid for their work that gets dragged into one of these schemes, right? So train your drivers on the suspicious incidences that can cause you to get dragged into a theft, blind shipments, altered bills of lading, payments being offered by Zelle or, some other kind of instantaneous cash transaction. If something smells funny, there's probably something funny going on. And that's where you go back to the standard operating procedures. Okay, driver spots an issue. Who is that driver trained to call? Right? Like, are they trained to make a call? Hey, something suspicious is going on. I'm at a truck stop parking lot and it appears that a car has been following me for the last 50 miles since pickup. What should I do? Right? Then it's who to call, right? What's the chain of command to respond to those kinds of incidences? And I'm talking proactively, and then afterwards. And I think that brings me to the last point is for the people that become the victims of the thefts, who is in charge of doing the post-mortem to see what went wrong? Right? Who looks at the dash cam video? Who looks at the sequence of events, when it was picked up, when it was dropped off, and then who takes a look at that, identifies what's wrong, and then updates those procedures for the future so that you can prevent a similar situation from happening again. Same thing can be said about retraining a driver after unsafe driving situations, right? Risk management is really an evolving system. It's not a static system at all.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring up training and the retraining. So I think situational training is really important. I've been keenly focused on the technology and the safety side for years about putting drivers into scenarios where they know how to react versus learn how to react at the moment. I think there's similar elements here, but it's not lost on me the excitement of that movement, of that opportunity, right? I'll share a personal story. A couple of years ago, I was trying to buy a Jeep for my son. He had come to the age where he had his driver's license, and I think I was looking at one of the local things, and it said, and I live near a military base, and it said, hey, $5,000 red, Jeep Wrangler. I'm like, all right, that's about what I want to spend for my 16-year-old to be a cool car for him. And the ad said, well, it's a military transaction, and so it's tucked away in storage because the person who's selling is deployed. Right? That's a great story. Like you feel like, hey, all right, I believe it. I didn't stop the transaction until they wanted me to pay for it with $5,000 of Apple cards. And I'm actually standing, and I'll tell you, like, because it's hard to sort of walk through this, because I'm actually standing in the supermarket going, they don't even have $5,000 of iTunes cards. And then it dawned on me, I'm like, oh, this is a scam, right?
Yeah.
So, even the opportunities where you just want to believe that you're walking, you're proceeding through this, great opportunity. And sometimes, without that training that you emphasize, Chris, it's, it's all the training we get, at work for, the required InfoSec training and the HR training and all that stuff. It puts us in those scenarios when they do happen that your spidey sense kind of tingles a little bit and goes, wait a minute, this isn't right. And I think, everyone has those aha moments. So, I think in terms of the policy plans, certainly very important, if not, to really ask the right questions. But Adam Lang, you brought up great points about that, just that continued training and the infusion of people and technology.
Well, and I mean, some of the things, and I'm going to give a nice little best practice to anyone out there that wants to steal this idea. There are no secrets in safety and cargo theft prevention, let's say. Take little magnetized, Haida keys and put a note in there and say, call XYZ when you find this. Hide it on the trailer, hide it on the tractor. When your drivers find it during a pre-trip inspection, give them a reward, give them a gift card, give them something that rewards their diligence by looking over all their equipment, because sometimes cargo thefts can be clever. They can put tracking devices on there that are not for you, like an Apple AirTag. You can buy them for what, $10 and then throw it on a high value load of cargo. Get those types of proactive plans in place along with training. Talk about where you're going to park. Outfit your truck and trailer with cameras. The more, the better. I know that the Octo system is coming out with Netradyne. Amazing thing to equip. Live streaming when you're driving in a situation where I had this happen. A driver called me, and I'm gonna omit some of the details, but he was convinced that this white van, and it was the stereotypical white van, was following him. And he had a high cargo value. I talked to him the whole time. He got to a safe location. He parked between two trucks at a truck stop. That van circled around twice and then took off. We didn't have cameras at that time. But this guy was terrified, and I didn't blame him, because whoever was in this van, they were obviously following him if they circled that lot twice. So again, train for that diligence. Adam, you bring up an excellent point. Have a process, call in, know who to call, when to call. And if something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't.
Yeah, so I just want to add to what Adam Lang said here. So he mentioned a product called Octo. So Netradyne does have a product called the D810, which the internal name was Octo. The tagline of Octo is like the octopus who has 8 legs. This camera has 8 cameras, so you can imagine the amount of viewpoints that you can now share, front, interior, side, back of trailer, inside trailer, at the 5-pin, at the 7-pin, hook, all these different locations where any bit of more insight that you can give can, help a carrier recover their freight in the case where it's a physical, theft. Chris, we have just a couple of minutes here, maybe a minute or two. I was interested if there was some, really good solid takeaways or resources that, the audience can kind of learn more, or, they can reach out to you, or, what would you suggest for a motor carrier who's listening to this and says, wow, you guys certainly opened my eyes today. Now what?
Sure. Well, I think the first takeaway is you have to be more careful than ever. And by the way, one message that I'm really trying to get out into this industry that I don't think enough people are talking about is that, we talk about we as stakeholders. It really is everyone's responsibility, trucking companies, freight brokers, but also shippers. And I wonder if Netradyne might even have products available for shippers for verifying license plates and identities. You talk about the camera in the back of a trailer. When somebody breaks in, you can help identify that individual. But I think that there's more that could be done for training and security at the shipper level too, because a lot of these loads, I mean, probably more than half the time somebody is taking the load forcibly. Right? They're stealing the shipment on a straight theft, but the other half of the time they're being given this shipment, right? So what can we do to prevent those shipments from getting into the wrong hands? U.S. Marine, you can find us on the web. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can reach out to Adam and the Netradyne group, and they can connect you with me. But no, I think the main message is be careful out there. The last few years have been a difficult one for the trucking industry, and you have to protect your business. You have to have all these procedures in place because we're all here for the long run, and that's what we all want is the best for everybody.
All right, Adam Lang, it's time. The closing, I'm going to give you the last minute for the dad joke, and then we're going to sign off and thank everyone for their time.
Sounds great. So, I've been reading a book about anti-gravity. And guess what? I can't put it down.
All right. With that, thank you, everyone. And we'll see you at the next episode in December.
Cheers. Thank you, guys.
Take care, all.